Hello and welcome back to Jekyll and Hyde, Annotate with an Examiner. We are continuing with part 2 of chapter 8, The Last Night. So far in chapter 8, just really summarised version, Jekyll's servant Poole urgently calls on Utterson for help, believing that Jekyll, his master, has been murdered and that the person who has locked himself away is Hyde. Okay, so we've already analysed that, and if you haven't watched it, then please go back and watch it. And we are now going to continue with part 2 of chapter 8. Just before I continue to read, you might want to go and grab your copy of the text, a pen, a highlighter, so that you can annotate alongside me. You might also want to go and grab a notepad so that you can make notes of any key quotations, and then you can use them for your assessments or revision in preparation for your literature exam. So let's get started. The footman came at the summons, very white and nervous. "Pull yourself together, Bradshaw," said the lawyer. "This suspense, I know, is telling upon all of you, but it is now our intention to make an end of it. Poole here and I are going to force our way into the cabinet. If all is well, my shoulders are broad enough to bear the blame. Meanwhile, lest anything should really be amiss, or any malefactor seek to escape by the back, you and the boy must go round the corner with a pair of good sticks and take your post at the laboratory door. We give you 10 minutes to get to your stations." So a malefactor is a wrongdoer, so someone who does wrong. As Bradshaw left, the lawyer looked at his watch. "And now, Poole, let us get to ours," he said, and taking the poker under his arm led the way into the yard. The scud had banked over the moon, and it was now quite dark. So a scud is a mass of vapoury clouds or misty clouds. We've got the use of pathetic fallacy, which we know Stevenson really likes to use in this novel, to create an ominous mood, foreshadowing something evil or ambiguous. The wind, which only broke in puffs and draughts into the deep well of the building, tossed the light of the candle to and fro about their steps until they came into the shelter of the theatre, where they sat down silently to wait. So we've got further use of the pathetic fallacy, showing that the wind is chaotic, so foreshadowing the chaos that's about to ensue. This also builds a lot of tension, and we see within this scene there's the building of tension. London hummed solemnly all around, so we've got the use of personification. Remember, it's important to identify these language techniques because you get marks for AO2 if you are identifying writers' methods. So the use of personification of London emphasizes the dismal and miserable mood that the men are sharing, and almost like the whole of London is feeling the same way. You could also argue that this is the use of hyperbole, over-exaggerated language, to show the exaggeration of the misery that's surrounding them. But nearer at hand, the stillness was only broken by the sounds of a footfall moving to and fro along the cabinet floor. "So it will walk all day, sir," whispered Poole. "Aye, and the better part of the night. Only when a new sample comes from the chemist there's a bit of a break. Ah, it's an ill conscience that's such an enemy to rest." So we've got Poole describing how the person who's inside Jekyll's room constantly walks, is always walking, and takes a little brief break when the servants have returned from the chemist with this pill or potion or medicine that he likes to take. Ah, sir, there's blood foully shed in every step of it. But hark again, a little closer. Put your heart in your ears, Mr. Utterson, and tell me, is that the doctor's foot?" The steps fell lightly and oddly, with a certain swing, for all they went so slowly. It was different indeed from the heavy creaking tread of Henry Jekyll. Utterson sighed. "Is there never anything else?" he asked. So they're both in agreement that these steps don't belong to Jekyll, that they sound like different. They sound very different. Remember, they're both suspecting that it is Hyde in there. Poole nodded. "Once," he said, "once I heard it weeping." "Weeping? How that?" said the lawyer, conscious of a sudden chill of horror. "Weeping like a woman or a lost soul." So we've got the use of a simile here. The use of simile here is very interesting because the crying of this person has connotations of vulnerability and fragility. So if the crying does belong to Hyde, then it's a very different side to Hyde that we're seeing. It's not savage or evil, and it encourages us to feel empathy. Is do you believe that Hyde is being victimized here? I'd like you to comment below if you think that he is being victimized. And if he is being victimized, why do you think Stevenson is presenting him as a victim here? This will really help you to try and think critically, try and think in an opinionated way, and try and reach for them really top grades, the grades 8s and 9s that you need to be critical for, said the butler. I came away with that upon my heart that I could have wept too. So even Poole feels empathy and deep sadness at the weeping and the crying of this person, despite his assumption that the person is Hyde and Hyde has murdered his beloved master. But now the 10 minutes drew to an end. We see in this scene there's constant waiting, which builds tension and creates suspense. Poole disinterred the axe from under a stack of packing straw. The candle was set upon the nearest table to light them to the attack, and they drew near with bated breath to where that patient foot was still going on up and down in the quiet of the night. "Jekyll," cried Utterson with a loud voice, "I demand to see you." He paused a moment, but there came no reply. "I give you fair warning. Our suspicions are aroused, and I must and shall see you," he resumed. "If not by fair means, then by foul. If not of your consent, then by brute force." "Utterson," said the voice, "for God's sake, have mercy." "Ah, that's not Jekyll's voice, it's Hyde's," cried Utterson. "Down with the door, Poole." Poole swung the axe over his shoulder. The blow shook the building, and the red baize door leaped against the lock and hinges. A dismal screech as of mere animal terror rang from the cabinet. So this is a really key quotation. You might want to make note of it on the notepad that I encourage you to have earlier on. So we've got further use of animalistic imagery here, used to show the inhumane and unnatural nature of the person that's in there. We've discussed in great length the reason behind the animalistic imagery in earlier videos, so if you haven't watched them, then please go back and watch them. Up went the axe again, and again the panels crashed and the frame bounded. 4 times the blow fell, but the wood was tough and the fittings were of excellent workmanship, and it was not until the 5th that the lock burst in sunder and the wreck of the door fell inwards on the carpet. The besiegers, appalled by their own riot and the stillness that had succeeded, stood back a little and peered in. There lay the cabinet before their eyes in the quiet lamplight, a good fire glowing and chattering on the hearth, the kettle singing its thin strain, a drawer or two open, papers neatly set forth on the business table, and near the fire the things laid out for tea. The quietest room, you would have said, but for the glazed presses full of chemicals, the most commonplace that night in London. So we've got the juxtaposing imagery of decorum and normal traditional behavior, juxtaposed with sort of scientific apparatus. So it's juxtaposing almost like Jekyll and Hyde, the two characters. So Jekyll being representative of good traditional behavior, and Hyde being representative of evil. And we'll come back to that idea in a moment as well, so if you keep that in mind. Right in the midst there lay the body of a man sorely contorted and still twitching. A man sorely contorted and still twitching. So you might want to make note of this quotation as well. We've got the imagery of Hyde here. So we do find out later that it is Hyde, so I'm sorry for the spoiler, but we've got the imagery of Hyde here. But used to again show his vulnerability and fragility. So again, you could argue that this is suggesting that Hyde is being victimized here. They drew near on tiptoe, turned it on its back, and beheld the face of Edward Hyde. He was dressed in clothes far too large for him, clothes of the doctor's bigness. So there are several puzzling details upon their entrance, and among them is the oversized clothes that Hyde wears. These cannot be explained and create further tension, because remember, these men like rational reasoning behavior. They like things to make sense, and this clearly does not make sense. The chords of his face still moved with a semblance of life, but life was quite gone, and by the crushed file in the hand and the strong smell of kernels that hung upon the air, Utterson knew that he was looking on the body of a self-destroyer. So we've spoken about what it means to follow Utterson's perspective before. And again, by following Utterson's perspective in this account and only being privy to the extent of his knowledge, we see how he judges what he sees before him, before he has any evidence for that judgment. So he sees the body of Hyde on the floor, convulsing, and he assumes that Hyde has committed suicide. He always follows reason, but there is a suggestion that, in reality, perhaps he focuses on reason in order to avoid facing the stranger clues before him. What do you think about that? Do you think that he follows reason because he's just a logical guy? Or do you think that it's because it's almost like he's avoiding the strangeness, the clues that he needs to piece together? Again, highlighting perhaps his hypocrisy. "We have come too late," he said sternly. "Whether to save or punish Hyde is gone to his account, and it only remains for us to find the body of your master." The far greater proportion of the building was occupied by the theatre, which filled almost the whole ground story, and was lighted from above, and by the cabinet which formed an upper story at one end and looked upon the court. A corridor joined the theatre to the door on the by-street, and with this the cabinet communicated separately by a second flight of stairs. There were besides a few dark closets and a spacious cellar. All these they now thoroughly examined. Each closet needed but a glance, for all were empty, and all, by the dust that fell from their doors, had stood long unopened. So they're looking for Jekyll. They can't seem to find Jekyll, they're looking for Jekyll. The cellar indeed was filled with crazy lumber, mostly dating from the times of the surgeon who was Jekyll's predecessor, but even as they opened the door they were advertised of the uselessness of further search by the fall of a perfect mat of cobweb which had for years sealed up the entrance. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll, dead or alive. Poole stamped on the flags of the corridor. "He must be buried here," he said, hearkening to the sound. So he thinks Poole's assuming that Jekyll must have been buried underground. "Or he may have fled," said Utterson, and he turned to examine the door in the by-street. It was locked, and lying near by on the flags they found the key, already stained with rust. So this looking for Jekyll is a perfect example of the character scrambling for a reason, for a reasonable explanation, so scrambling for reason. But each new reasonable suggestion turns out not to be correct, and reason itself comes to seem insufficient within this whole novella, but within this scene in particular. "This does not look like use," observed the lawyer. "Use?" echoed Poole. "Do you not see, sir, it is broken, much as if a man had stamped on it." "Aye," continued Utterson, "and the fractures too are rusty." The two men looked at each other with a scare. "This is beyond me, Poole," said the lawyer. "Let us go back to the cabinet." So they just can't form any reason. They mounted the stair in silence, and still with an occasional awestruck glance at the dead body, proceeded more thoroughly to examine the contents of the cabinet. At one table there were traces of chemical work, various measured heaps of some white salts being laid on glass saucers, as though for an experiment in which the unhappy man had been prevented. So we've got, again, lots of scientific apparatus, things that you would usually associate with science and experimentation used here. You could argue that this is representative of the science part of the novel and perhaps the science part of Jekyll. "That is the same drug that I was always bringing him," said Poole, and even as he spoke the kettle, with a startling noise, boiled over. This brought them to the fireside, where the easy chair was drawn cosily up, and the tea things stood ready to the sitter's elbow, the very sugar in the cup. So we've got the setup of each scene, which is designed very carefully by Stevenson for maximum symbolic effect. So here the traditional innocence of a tea set and a fireplace adds to the violent contrast already in play between objects of religion and science that populate Jekyll's room. So looking at this sort of symbolic effect is very much a grade 9 skill. Stevenson uses symbolism throughout his novella, and it's very sort of a very high level skill to be able to pick up on the effects of this symbolism. There were several books on a shelf. One lay beside the tea things open, and Utterson was amazed to find it a copy of a pious work, for which Jekyll had several times expressed a great esteem, annotated in his own hand with startling blasphemies. So a pious work, so religious work, something good, something moral, piece of work has been annotated with blasphemies, with things that, with words and phrases that are sort of making it seem as though he doesn't believe in religion anymore, making it seem as though he sees religion, Jekyll sees religion as lowly. So this highlights the change in Jekyll, how he has gone from a good Christian man to a man corrupted by science. You could link this to assessment objective 3, which is context, and how the 19th century was a time of new scientific discovery, and many people would have been intrigued by science, but also worried and skeptical that science may take over. We see this battle between science and religion throughout the novella. So here it's like this battle has been put into play. Jekyll is clearly battling with what he used to be and what he has become now. And we see that through the destruction of Jekyll, Stevenson making a clear argument that to meddle with science, to play God, is sinful and wrong and will only result in destruction. Next, in the course of their review of the chamber, the searchers came to the cheval glass, into whose depths they looked with an involuntary horror, but it was so turned as to show them nothing but the rosy glow playing on the roof, the fire sparkling in 100 repetitions along the glazed fronts of the presses, and their own pale and fearful countenance stooping to look in. "This glass have seen some strange things, sir," whispered Poole. "And surely none stranger than itself," echoed the lawyer in the same tones. For what did Jekyll, he caught himself up at the word with a start, and then conquering the weakness, what could Jekyll want with it? He said. "You may say that," said Poole. Next they turned to the business table. On the desk, among the neat array of papers, a large envelope was uppermost, and bore in the doctor's hand the name of Mr. Utterson. The lawyer unsealed it, and several enclosures fell to the floor. The first was a will, drawn in the same eccentric terms as the one which he had returned 6 months before to serve as a testament in case of death and as a deed of gift in case of disappearance. But in place of the name of Edward Hyde, the lawyer, with indescribable amazement, read the name of Gabriel John Utterson. So now, remember earlier the will was signed for Hyde, so should anything happen to Jekyll, all of Jekyll's belongings and money goes to Hyde. And remember, Utterson thought that it must be a bribery, there must be a reason behind it. But here he's changed the name to Utterson's. He looked at Poole and then back at the paper, and last of all at the dead malefactors stretched upon the carpet. "My head goes round," he said. "He has been all these days in possession. He had no cause to like me. He must have raged to see himself displaced, and he has not destroyed this document." So he doesn't understand why it is that Jekyll has made this will out to him. He doesn't understand why it's not being destroyed if he didn't want him to have it. So he's under the he assumes that Jekyll's still alive because of this. He caught up the next paper. It was a brief note in the doctor's hand and dated at the top. "Oh, Poole," the lawyer cried, "he was alive and here this day. He cannot have been disposed of in so short a space. He must be still alive. He must have fled. And then why fled, and how? And in that case, can we venture to declare this suicide? Oh, we must be careful. I foresee that we may yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe." So now he's thinking Hyde mustn't have committed suicide. He's assuming that Jekyll must have killed him. "Why don't you read it, sir?" So Poole's asking, "Why don't you read this letter that you've just found?" "Because I fear," replied the lawyer solemnly. So this is really interesting because the truth of the mystery lies behind layers of documents. We've spoken about this in great length and what this symbolizes. So lies behind layers of documents, seals, and conditions that pass the responsibility from one man to another. Now Utterson holds these explanations in his hands, at liberty to find out their confession, but he hesitates. His fear is typical of the fear of the society that Stevenson describes. The truth is a scary thing, and Utterson instinctively shies away from it. God grant I have no cause for it. And with that he brought the paper to his eyes and read as follows. My dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands I shall have disappeared, under what circumstances I have not the penetration to foresee, but my instinct and all the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure and must be early. Go then, and first read the narrative which Lanyon warned me he has to place in your hands, and if you care to hear more, turn to the confession of your unworthy and unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll. So he describes himself as unworthy, so not worthy of reputation. So clearly showing how remorseful and guilty he feels. There was a third enclosure, asked Utterson. Here, sir, said Poole, and gave into his hands a considerable packet, sealed in several places. The lawyer put it in his pocket. I would say nothing of this paper. If your master had fled or is dead, we may at least save his credit. So he's saying don't speak to anybody about this, don't speak to anybody about this piece of paper, that he needs to protect Jekyll's reputation. So he's more concerned about protecting Jekyll's reputation than doing the right and morally just thing. So this is another evidence of the hypocrisy Stevenson wanted to highlight. So you might want to make note of this quotation here as well in your notepad. It is now 10. I must go home and read these documents in quiet. But I shall be back before midnight, when we shall send for the police. They went out, locking the door of the theatre behind them, and Utterson, once more leaving the servants gathered about the fire in the hall, trudged back to his office to read the two narratives in which this mystery was now to be explained. So we've heard several times the threat that a document must only be read in the event of someone's death or disappearance. This unread information has been lurking behind everything, and now it is finally being revealed. In this moment of revelation, though, Utterson turns once again to secret keeping, going to a private place to read the contents of the letters, and in doing so allowing himself to control the information and perhaps protect his friend's reputation. So the two men, Poole and Utterson, are bewildered by what they've seen, and the chapter again ends, as others have done, with a plea for secrecy. So that's the end of chapter 8 now. In the next series, the next episode, we'll be looking at chapter 9. So if you've enjoyed this and found this useful, please remember to comment, like and subscribe, and you might want to turn on the notifications as well, so that you're notified every time we upload a video. Thank you. Bye.